Hey, what's going on, guys? It's HawksNest here, back with another Call of Duty mobile video. Now, in today's video, we're actually doing something that has been highly anticipated and highly requested, and that is a video on the suppressor attachment within Call of Duty Mobile. This video has been a long time coming because, once again, it's taken me a while to actually gather up all the information on the suppressor and test it across all different guns and just give you guys the most possible information that I can, while also obviously keeping it in a nice video format where it's not super confusing and you guys can understand it very simply. But before we get into the video, I just wanted to talk about today's video sponsor. So I've actually partnered up with Frag Pro Shooter to sponsor today's video. Now, what Frag Pro Shooter actually is a super fun, and I say that because I've literally actually played it. I really enjoy this game. It's a really fun change of pace from other games. But anyway, essentially what it is a shooter game where you select 5 different heroes to be on your team, and then you go and play another team of 5. So when you actually load into a match, you'll have your 5 heroes and you'll be playing another person's 5 heroes, and you can control one of them at a time and you can switch to any hero you want. And when you're actually playing, you can switch between first or third person, whatever your play style is inside of the game. It's super easy to switch in the moment. But essentially, when you're actually playing, the goal that you're going for is to get the other team's point bar all the way down to 0. Now, you'll actually make the other team lose points by either killing the enemy heroes and by destroying the other team's 2 mini towers and then their main tower as the final one. Now, each hero will actually have a different special ability as well as their main weapon. So, for example, my favorite hero is Pocahontas, who has a super strong bow, and she uses that most of the time, and then her special ability is she uses that bow, but the shots are like super strong and it fires a burst of them. But anyway, there's loads of heroes that you can actually unlock as you progress through the game, and the more cards you actually get of a specific hero, the more you can level it up. So you're constantly building up your team and trying different strategies to see what your favorite hero combinations are. And inside of the game, there is also a 2v2 mode where basically it'll be the exact same thing, except you'll pair up with a friend or a random teammate. And if you're looking for people to actually play with inside of that mode, you can join my club or clan. It's called The Nest. That's literally all you have to look up if you do want to join it. So if you do actually get the game, make sure to join The Nest so you can play with me and other club mates. They also hooked me up with some awesome rewards for you guys. If you download the game using the link in the description, you'll actually get 1 golden chest, 500 coins, and 50 diamonds, which is actually a ton of rewards. So once again, thank you Frag Pro Shooter for actually sponsoring this video. Now let's go on with the rest of the video. So yeah, once again, make sure to check the link down in the description if you guys do want to pick up the game. But anyway, today we will be talking about, once again, the suppressor attachment within COD Mobile. Hopefully we'll keep this video pretty short. I just want to let you guys know the essentials. More than likely what I'll tell you is exactly what the suppressor does and what guns are good with the suppressor, what guns are bad, and just all of that essentially, so you guys can make a decision on whether or not you should use a suppressor inside of your loadout. So before we talk about what the suppressor actually does, let's talk about what it doesn't do and kind of clear up some of the common misconceptions. So one very common misconception with the suppressor is that it will reduce recoil. This is not true. What it actually just does is it changes the sound of the gun. Now, when the gun has a very full and very loud sound, it sounds like it's kicking more because it sounds a little bit beefier, and typically guns that sound louder kick a lot harder. So when the gun noise is quieter, which the suppressor does is it makes the noise quieter, it makes it seem like the gun isn't kicking quite as hard, because again, it just makes it seem like it's not as aggressive. But again, a suppressor does not affect your recoil. I've tested this quite a bit. It won't change anything about your recoil. It won't make your recoil go lower. It won't make it kick to the side less. Your recoil patterns will look exactly the same. Another thing is the suppressor won't reduce your damage. So, for example, depending on the range that you're shooting someone, the AK-117 will deal 24 damage, 22 damage, 20 damage, or 17 damage to the body, obviously. It will do more damage to the head, but most of the time you'll be dealing 24, 22, 20, or 17 damage. With a suppressor, you're still going to be dealing 24, 22, 20, and 17 damage. So those damage values don't change. Now, what does change, and this is the biggest negative of the suppressor, is that your range values will be decreased. We'll break down exactly how that works soon, but let's go ahead and talk about the positives of the suppressor. Now, the suppressor has 2 main positives. Number 1 is the sound is quieter for your gun. So basically what this means is enemy players will have a harder time actually hearing where your shots are because the sound is just reduced. How much it's reduced really depends on the gun, so we won't be talking about that too much, but again, the suppressor just reduces the noise of your gun. There are a couple guns though I will point out where the suppressor noise is super quiet. We'll talk about that soon. But again, most of the time the noise is just reduced. Now, the other thing about the suppressor is it hides you from the minimap essentially. Now, it doesn't always hide you from the minimap. Obviously, if an enemy player has a UAV, you'll still show up on there. But typically when you shoot your gun, a red dot will pop up on the enemy's minimap showing where you are. But with a suppressor, that doesn't happen. You won't pop up on the minimap. So again, number one, your shots are quieter, and number two, you won't pop up on the minimap. So it makes you much more undetectable, and typically enemy players will have a harder time tracking down where you are when you're actually shooting at them. Now, obviously, if you're in a gunfight, like face-to-face, like if I'm looking at you and you're looking at me and we're shooting at each other, a suppressor is really not going to do anything because, obviously, you already know where I am. The only benefit you'll have in that kind of situation is that other enemy players won't really know where you are. Obviously, just the person you're fighting will know. So that's why a suppressor typically isn't very good on guns where you're going to be taking a lot of face-to-face gunfights. It's typically better for guns that you're going to be flanking with and shooting from the side quite often, or guns that you're kind of sitting back in certain corners and camping a little bit, which we'll call stealth loadouts because you want to be very stealthy. That's the point of the suppressor. And another benefit of the suppressor is it actually reduces the muzzle flash. If you guys don't know what muzzle flash is, it's essentially when you're shooting your gun, there's like this flash of like fire in front of your gun essentially. And obviously that can be very distracting, especially if you use guns with iron sights. Sometimes the iron sights and the muzzle flash will just kind of get in the way, and it just doesn't make for a good aiming experience. So a suppressor can actually reduce that muzzle flash, making it a little bit easier to use iron sights, or even a red dot depending on how bad the muzzle flash is. But once again, because the suppressor does have a negative effect on the range, which again we're going to talk about very soon, some guns it's just really not worth it to actually get this like suppressed noise and the ability to hide yourself from the minimap. It's just really not worth it because your gun will have a lot less range, which is very bad on certain guns and not quite as bad on other guns, which we'll go ahead and talk about right now. So first of all, this is how the suppressor works. The suppressor will reduce your range values by 30%. If you're wondering exactly how this works, let's use the AK-117 as an example once again. So the AK-117 will deal 24 damage from 0 to 12 meters. Now with a suppressor, that number 12 is going to get cut down by 30%. So what this means is instead of getting 24 damage from 0 to 12 meters, it will be 24 damage from 0 to about 8.5 meters. So if you want to see a visual representation of what that looks like, here's the normal damages and ranges of the AK-117, and here's what it looks like with the suppressor. So as you can see, every single line where the damage value changes, it just went down 30%. Also, if you guys are curious of all the damage and range values for every single gun inside of Call of Duty Mobile, you can go to my website, the COD Mobile section, and then the gun section, and you can actually basically see what the ranges are. And then all you have to do once again is just cut those by 30% to see a suppressor. More than likely in the future, I'll actually add an image for the suppressor so you guys can see like a visual representation. But right now we just have the normal damage chart, and then again, just cut it by 30%. Now, once again, I tested all of the guns, and it's the same thing for all of them, except for a few guns that we're going to talk about soon, which are a little bit different. So for the guns that I actually recommend with the suppressor, the reason that I say they're better than others, even though they have that same 30% range reduction, they're good with a suppressor essentially because the time to kill is barely affected. If you guys are wondering what time to kill is, it basically takes the damage and it sees how many shots you'd have to do with that damage to kill somebody. So for example, with the AK-117, from 0 to 12 meters, the gun will deal 24 damage, which is a 5-shot kill. It takes 5 shots to kill somebody. And then from 13 to 21 meters, it is 22 damage, which is still a 5-shot kill. So even though the damage is different, the amount of shots that it actually takes to kill someone is the exact same. So even though the range is getting reduced, the range is still, it's basically the same thing between the values, if you guys understand what I'm saying. So most of the time you won't really feel this difference because once again, the shots and time to kill is going to be the exact same. Obviously you will feel the difference sometimes, maybe if you're hitting headshots or shooting someone through a wall or shooting someone that's low HP. But for most fights, when you're just shooting at someone that's full HP in the open field or behind cover or whatever, you won't really feel a difference. So that's why guns like the AK-117 are a little bit better with a suppressor. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be curious about the snipers. So for the snipers that are one-shot kill or have one-shot kill potential, which are the DLQ, the Outlaw, Arctic 50, and the Locust, they actually have no downside of the suppressor, meaning there is no range reduction, there is no reduced damage, there is nothing. The only thing that happens to a sniper with a suppressor is your noise is quieter and you don't pop up on the minimap. So that makes the DLQ, the Outlaw, Arctic 50, and Locust very, very, very good options to put a suppressor on. I actually highly recommend it if you like the sound of the suppressor. I know a lot of people don't like sniping if the sound is different, but those are great guns with a suppressor. Some other great guns with a suppressor for the reasons that I said before with the AK-117 are obviously the AK-117 is great. The RPD is great, especially since with the RPD you can kind of sit back. You can play kind of aggressive with the RPD, but the RPD is amazing suppressed when you're kind of just holding an angle in the back. It is kind of toxic to like camp with the RPD, but if you wanted to do it with a suppressor, it is a very, very good option. The Type 25 is a great flanking option with a suppressor. The M4 and the ICR are great long-range guns with the suppressor. The reason that they're good with the suppressor is because the range reduction with those two guns is very close range, and you don't want to be using those guns close range anyway, so it's not really a big deal that they do actually have their ranges reduced. The M4 LMG is also a great option. The M21 and XPR are not great guns, but they are, what I mean by that is they're not great, and a suppressor doesn't really make them go any lower. So even with a suppressor, they're not going to be great, but they do definitely work with one. And also the M21 and XPR actually do have negatives. They do actually have some range reduction, not like the other snipers, but it's not a big deal because the range on those guns are so far anyway that with a little bit of range reduction, it's not that big of a deal. The other great gun is the Chicom. I'm going to make a video on this thing very soon because it was actually secretly buffed recently, but the Chicom is a solid option with a suppressor, and the UL736. Some of the guns that work with the suppressor, I wouldn't recommend it, but you could definitely get away with it and it'd be just fine, is the KN44, the GKS, the LK24, the HBR, and the only reason the HBR is great is because it's crazy quiet. The sound of it is just ridiculously quiet. And the PDW is okay. You do get some range reduction with the PDW, but if you're playing to flank people, it's really good. And also the PDW has a lot of muzzle flash. And as I said before, the suppressor will actually reduce your muzzle flash, which makes it easier to use the iron sights on the gun. So if you do want to scope in a little bit faster, because you do scope in with iron sights as opposed to like a red dot, a suppressor is not a bad idea at all. Now, for the next section, which is probably shouldn't use a suppressor, I would put every other gun that I haven't mentioned right here, except for a couple more, which is in the never use a suppressor section. So if I didn't mention a gun so far, just assume it's a probably shouldn't use the suppressor, because once again, in my opinion, I think the range reduction just isn't worth it. You can use this, you'll probably get away with it, but just personally, I wouldn't recommend it. I think there's better options if you want to play suppressed. Now, the never section is going to be the M16 and the Pharaoh. I say these two guns are never because those guns are very reliant on you actually getting a one burst, and because the range is reduced, the range that you can actually one burst someone is going to be reduced as well, which does not bode well for these guns because, again, they heavily rely on being able to one burst, and you want to make sure you can do that as much as possible, and putting a suppressor on will basically limit how far you can actually one burst someone. Next up is shotguns. Shotguns actually don't, I can't tell what suppressors do with this. I might make a video in the future. It seems like it's really weird and buggy, so I'll talk about it later, but I just wouldn't really recommend using a suppressor anyway. I'd probably do a long barrel with it instead. And finally is the RUS. The RUS is like, could put a suppressor on, you could, like, it might work, but at the same time, I just don't think it's ever really worth it. I think a long barrel, a foregrip, and a quick draw is just kind of the way to go, and putting a suppressor on is just not going to be worth it. And I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but SMGs, you can actually do a long barrel and a suppressor at the same time. I'll talk about the long barrel plus suppressor combo in the future when I actually do make an SMG video, but just know if you do want to use a suppressor with an SMG, you can actually bump your ranges back up a little bit with a long barrel. I don't fully know what the long barrel does yet because I haven't tested it, but once again, if you want to combine those two, you can actually get the sound suppression of the suppressor while also getting your range back a little bit with the long barrel. So that is it for this video. I hope you guys did enjoy it. Make sure to comment down below if you guys did, and also drop a like and sub if you guys really enjoyed it and want to see more future content, including a video on the SMGs, the cordite when it comes out, long barrel, all that stuff. Again, make sure to drop a sub if you want to see that. And with all of that being said, I will see you guys later. Peace.